Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. Also, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 6 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Keep Things Running, how Datadog and PagerDuty count on each other to drive DevOps. Our speakers today are Ryan McLean, who is tech evangelist at Datalog, and Rich Lafferty, who is senior site reliability engineer at PagerDuty. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for the intro. Good morning.
All right. Good morning. Well, I know you guys have a great presentation on tap, so I'm going to take myself off camera, on mute, and let you guys get right to it.
Thanks so much. Morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So as Charlene said, it's keeping things running, how Datadog and PagerDuty count on each other to drive DevOps. Let's see if we can advance the slides here. All right, so a quick intro. I'm Ryan. I've been on call for 20 years, and for almost 10 of those, I was a PagerDuty user. I've supported everything from marketing microsites to web scale deployments to payment systems, and I've used PagerDuty the whole time. What about yourself, Rich?
My name is Rich Lafferty. I'm working out of Toronto for PagerDuty, where I'm a site reliability engineer. I know I got a little more gray than Ryan does, so I think maybe I got a couple more years than 20, but I've also been doing this for a very long time, and mostly in an engineering role, occasionally in a management role, kind of seeing both sides of things. And it's been PagerDuty and Datadog for me the whole time before I started working at PagerDuty as well.
Right on. All right, so I just want to quickly introduce the problem. So it goes something like this. So teams are overburdened by chaotic incident response. Escalations from outages to incident can happen quickly. You need timestamps to record who, what, where, what happened. And also you need to quickly switch gears between pre-incident to the thick of the action. So basically what we're trying to do is do things like reduce detection and response times, create business values, create better quality of life for engineers, and allow you to not have and allowing you to have incident commanders early on in the process. And we're just going to kind of go over how we use our tools and how that works in practice. And quickly for an agenda, so again, we're going to talk about how we build a strong incident management workflow with PagerDuty and how PagerDuty leverages Datadog, and then how to use the two platforms in tandem to reduce detection and response times, create business value, and create a better quality of life for engineers. Not to repeat myself. All right, I'll hand it over to Rich.
Yeah, so just to talk a little bit about PagerDuty first. There we go. It wouldn't be a webinar without a technical problem. PagerDuty, we call ourselves a platform for real-time operations. In the digital world we're in, businesses need to be always on. If you're an ops practitioner or if you manage them, I'm sure you already feel this day to day. Everyone thinks of PagerDuty as on-call notifications, but there's a lot more to it than that. Really, we're kind of a platform for real-time operations, not to just manage on-call, but to make it as effective as possible. When a problem occurs and you're always on as at risk, PagerDuty is about getting the right people involved at the right level at the right time. To help the folks that are on call be effective at resolving incidents and help the process of resolving incidents support the whole business, to cut through the complexity and noise and make sure that the responders and the stakeholders have the tools they need to act and be informed. We support a lot of business functions. This is sort of a standard slide, but the ones you know about, the ones you all know have on-call responsibilities, like operations and IT. But the other parts of the business that could use PagerDuty, customer support, to make sure key customer issues get resolved on time, or even into sales and marketing to make sure the right people are available when it's time to close a deal or to adjust an ad buy when situations change. That's it for today. I know what you folks are all interested here in DevOps.com, so we're going to be focusing on the folks that operate software systems in production. So, IT, ops, DevOps, and developers. There we go. Apologies for the slides. There we are. So yeah, so one of the one of the key leverage points of PagerDuty is its integrations, and a modern always on business has a lot of moving parts, and one of the big keys of PagerDuty is that we support all of them. It's a really unique position, kind of in the center of the tech ecosystem. We integrate all this stuff out of the box. We can get it up and going in a couple minutes, and a lot of these integrations are bidirectional, allowing teams to come together and collaborate, even though their cultures are very different and the work they're doing is very different. So when it comes to real-time operations, it's more than just managing on call. We often talk with customers in later stages that this graphic is what PagerDuty does, but this is what you're all doing. This is what companies do. And we help in every single step of the process, getting all of the data in, making sense of it, cutting through the noise, making sure teams are responding and engaging. And after the fires are put out, analyzing and learning, really understanding what's going on. One other thing I wanted to call out is that, for DevOps practitioners on this call, it's really important to get the information where you need it. If you're on call 24/7 after hours, follow the sun, however you do it like that. There's a lot going on. And so we bring incident information and notification updates right to you. Whether that's iOS or Android or Slack or Microsoft Teams, we make sure that you and your teams can keep involved and stay close to the action. So that's the PagerDuty side. Ryan's going to tell you a little bit about Datadog.
All right. So just for a quick intro to Datadog, I promise to keep it quick. I realize that the sales pitch stuff is super interesting, but I'll quickly go over what we do and why it's important. So if you haven't heard of Datadog, basically what we are is an observability platform that provides full visibility across your organization. So we enable everyone that's ops, dev, security, even your business, to have a complete understanding of system and application performance by monitoring end-to-end from your infrastructure and to your network, to your applications and services, all the way to your end users. And it's easy to get up and running in just a few minutes. I think the last time I tried this out, it took about 5. So Datadog provides over 350 integrations. You can see a few of those here on this slide here. That covers all the apps, frameworks, languages, and third-party services that you use, including PagerDuty, of course. From collecting critical data and out-of-the-box insightful dashboards to alerting and collaborative tools like Slack or Teams, we've made setup a breeze. And once you're set up, Datadog seamlessly merges your metrics, traces, and logs so you can see what's happening and know why. You can view your metrics from your infrastructure, your application, your users, and easily correlate that to traces that follow the code path from your user's browser all the way through your backend systems and databases. Then you can view it together with the logs generated from your systems during that time. And we provide all of the information you need in one tool, so you can pinpoint problems and resolve them quickly. Just a quick explainer about this slide. So on the left-hand side, you've got like tracing of your actual code calls. And on the right-hand side, it's almost like a service overview. So looking at which service is calling which, you can see if there's some backend stuff in here as well. Datadog also provides smart tools to help you know about problems often before they occur. With anomaly and outlier detection, you can set intelligent alerts to reduce false alarms and pager fatigue. Our machine learning powered watchdog will automatically look for potential issues across your systems and notify you of problems that would otherwise have been overlooked. And Datadog's reach goes beyond traditional server and application monitoring. We also offer network and security monitoring to allow you to see what's happening between your services and to stay safe from attacks. There's way too much to cover here, so the best way to learn about Datadog is to get a hands-on with a 14-day trial. We'll have a link at the end to get you signed up. And again, the setup takes about 5 minutes to get started, and then probably about 5 to 10 minutes per integration. And to sign up for and find additional information, you can visit datadoghq.com. All right, so Rich, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, so there's the sales pitch done. What's really interesting though, what's really interesting is when we get to talk about each other, because like really the neat part here isn't like I can tell you what PagerDuty does, whatever. But Datadog has used PagerDuty for a very long time. PagerDuty has used Datadog for a very long time. And what's really interesting, like these, it's like two peas in a pod. Really tight connection between it. So we're going to start off. Ryan's going to explain, kind of a bit about how Datadog uses PagerDuty, and then once he's done, I'm going to tell you how PagerDuty uses Datadog. And then we'll kind of, from there, once we kind of got the basics out of the way, we'll kind of talk about how both of us do our whole DevOps operation service ownership incident response stuff.
That works for me. All right, so this is like an eye test slide. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'll try not to just read the points, but give you a little bit more information. Essentially, we use PagerDuty for a lot of stuff. So some of this is like very simple that you might think is sort of rational, reasonable for you to use. Some of it's a little bit more advanced, but basically when you get like a distributed team across many geographies, one of the first thing you notice is that time zones are hard, especially setting up schedules for multiple engineers, multiple services, multiple teams, multiple regions. Even if you're just dispersed within like a few different states, a few different provinces in Canada, or a few different countries in Europe, it can become really complicated to figure out who's on call where, especially when things like daylight savings are coming into play and they come into like different times in different places. It seems trivial, but it's actually a really important thing to be able to schedule something in a shared calendar essentially that will change over time throughout different regions and different time zones. Super, super critical. So again, I know it sounds easy, but it's actually something that's fairly difficult and PagerDuty handles really well and is crucial for us to not have to worry about like, hey, the time zone changed. Did we change the schedule? Did we make sure we got this handled? That kind of thing. The other thing that you might think is easy to do in an incident, but is a lot better done automatically, is to take care of like follow-ups or escalation if someone's not available. So for example, if I'm on call and I set up PagerDuty to call me on the phone, but I don't answer within the first 3 rings, like having it call back to make sure it wakes me up is super important, or possibly to call someone else if I don't answer within a certain time frame. Maybe I'm unavailable, that kind of thing. So those automatic escalations or follow-ups, so to call you multiple times or to escalate to a different engineer is super critical. Again, it sounds easy, but it's really important in a time crunch to make sure you're hitting your SLAs. And of course, with distributed teams, as you scale, as you get bigger, as you get more servers, more services, and more engineers, mapping the teams to the services is something that's also very, very important. So we find that people will use PagerDuty to basically look up like who's on a team almost. So it's almost like a directory of who's responsible for what service and who do I escalate to when I can't find that person. So being able to map for us almost 50 teams to about 100 services and more than that for schedules is super, super handy. Now for us, we use Slack, but of course it's got Teams integration as well. But the deep Slack integration for us, as you'll see in a couple more slides here, is very, very handy. So it means that as we're working throughout the day in our instant messaging tool, we can do things like set people on or off call. We can set up separate like bot actions for us if we wanted to, like chatbot actions. So we can do things like set up a manual escalation right from Slack without having to log onto a website and go through a tool to do it, which isn't hard, don't get me wrong, but it removes those extra steps. You can do that all within one tool with a / command. And then again, it seems easy, but being able to set the priority on alerts right within the tool, as opposed to saying to something like that notifications are the same as alerts, are the same as incidents, being able to set those different levels within the tool and have them react differently depending on what you said is very, very handy. And then of course, and this is really, really critical, is reminding you when you're about to go on call, but also off call. So to know like when you're supposed to do your handoff, that kind of thing. So to remind you, hey, if you've been having a problem that you think might come up for the next engineer, to write that doc so that they know what's happening before they go on call for the service that you're working with on your same team. And the same thing, like if you're swapping shifts between engineers, so if I'm on call next week, but I've also got to go to an important meeting, so I won't be available during an hour or something like that, being able to swap shifts easily is very, very handy. And that's something PagerDuty helps us do. And then we'll probably mention this a couple times during this webinar, but not having to stare at the dashboards all the time when you're on a call is really critical. And I know they look nice when you walk into like a knock and you see all the dashboards. It's great to see, but being able to get your work done without necessarily needing to watch the dashboard the whole time you're on call and look for those anomalies and look for those alerts is really critical. So knowing that PagerDuty's got your back, if something should come up that's going to alert you, is key. And then finally, looking at the history at a glance to see if there's a pattern. So basically to say, if we've been having issues week over week at a specific time or something like that, being able to see those escalations or see what's been happening on a historical basis is really critical when it comes down to doing things like postmortems, that kind of stuff. So being able to see like the trends in the actual tool. All right, so I talked about Slack integration. This is kind of like what it looks like. I stole this from the PagerDuty site, full disclosure. But basically, you can see here that not only is it sending messages, but also it's got actions on the messages. So this is a pretty deceptive screenshot. There's a lot going on here. So one, it's triggering you. So you've got the triggered event. You can see who's assigned to it. So B and D in this case are the placeholder. You can see that there's a dial-in number and a meeting already set up for this all at the same time, on top of which you can tell for what service it is. So you can see if there's a test incident, it's got a dial-in number, it's got a URL that you can just click on to go to, and you can see that it's for that specific service. And on top of which, and it sounds like I'm digging into this, but this is really key. So there's a lot of functionality just in this one message. You can acknowledge it saying that, hey, like I saw this, no one else needs to look at this, I'm on it. You can resolve it if you know that it's already been fixed. And then more actions under here. So there's a few things that you can do under there, but basically this is the key scenario. And then once it's been resolved, in this, again, it sounds simple, but basically being able to send that extra message that has the fact that, hey, it's been merged with the incident that went through. It gives you the timestamp that it happened. So in case your chat comes through later, you can tell when it actually happened here. And then you can actually see like all the other information here. So it kind of ties it together for you, which is great. And I'm glossing over a little bit, but you can see that the first one is red and the second one is green. Like these are really simple things. But for us, like we've deeply integrated our Slack install to our PagerDuty subscription. So it's actually really critical for us to be able to use all of this within the same tool. The default integration, which you see above, like this is just what you get out of the box. It's actually super, super handy. It's evolved a lot over the years, and it's become basically something that we use as our primary interface into PagerDuty. I know I spent a lot on this slide, but like honestly, it's actually really key. And I've used it in Teams as well, in case you're a Teams user, and it actually does have very similar integration with the Teams cards functionality, which is really nice. All right, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we've customized. So I said a little bit that we've got like chatbot integrations. Some of this stuff is you get out of the box with the Slack integration for PagerDuty. Some of it you can set up on your own. So there's a bunch of chatbots out there. I think QBot is the one that we're using for these, but basically there's bot framework, I think from Azure. A bunch of different places have their own bots, but for us, what we do is allow us to do things like say, hey, what's currently going on? If I've got an incident that's just come in, what other incidents might be coming on? And it may sound like on a smaller team, like this isn't very critical, but as you get more services and as your systems become distributed, problems become a little bit more complicated. So it's handy to see if there's anything else going on that might be related to the problem that you're having. Let's say there's like a DNS or SSL issue or something like that. This may be more widespread than just your service. It's handy to see. So incident list, outage list are key for us to see what's currently happening. And then also, if you've got something that come in and you quickly know that you need to escalate it, being able to just do like a slash command, so slash escalate and then the PagerDuty ID will escalate it for us. So it will do things like, let's say we need to notify a certain business department or like a different stakeholder or another team if they're like a downstream dependent of my service, letting them know that we've currently got an incident is really critical. So it's an easy way to quickly type in things with the keyboard instead of going to the website and doing stuff where you can do it quickly in Slack and get people notified. And I spent a lot of time on this, but it's really key for us that this integration is there and really easy to use and also extensible. So if we want to add other API calls to Datadog, to PagerDuty from Slack, we can easily do it right from within the chatbot. And then finally, one of the other areas that we integrate with PagerDuty in terms of like infrastructure or alerting as code is within Terraform. So for us, the teams, rotations, and schedules are handled within Terraform. And the thing that's nice about this is we can do like an approval process for your pull request. So as we're pushing code through to our repositories, we can actually go through the same change approval lifecycle that we would for normal code changes as well. So for things like if you're changing a schedule, that kind of thing, you might have like a different approval path. But for things like setting up a new team, setting up a new rotation, that kind of thing, it can be handy to see what's happening prior to setting it up, so you know if there's a dependency that needs to be set up or if there's something that we've forgotten we can do. So things like changes to team members, so if we're adding new members, we can see it through there, and things like schedules and overlaps we'll generally discuss in Slack. Now, that being said, the other thing that's really handy here in Terraform is, let's say you're setting up a new service and you know that you need to set up PagerDuty alerts or you need to know which team is involved, you can do things like boilerplate services. So what happens is you can do things like set up a service in Terraform, so your infrastructure, possibly a bit of your code, but you can also set up things like your monitors, your alerts at the same time in Terraform. So when it's deployed, it's got like a rational base, basically. So it's got like a certain like base point that you've got. So you don't have to worry about these later. It's something that you can set up at the same time. So you can get new services deployed quickly. You can ensure consistency across your services, and you can allow for review of changes for global changes. So let's say if you want to change multiple services at once to no longer have a certain type of alert, or if you know that what used to be a notification is now an alert, then you can do that en masse, so basically on many services at once, which is really, really key when you've got so many services happening at the same time. So you can do those overall kind of changes. Now, in terms of where we use PagerDuty, you can kind of see here, this is like the whole way through the incident. So start, respond, priority assign, impact, and resolution postmortem. So the whole time, PagerDuty is actually the key component that we use, which is why I was excited about this webinar today. Honestly, it's something that we use and we love, so it's something that we want to talk about. So during a typical incident, PagerDuty is involved in all the stages at the start of the incident. So when the notification or the incident or the alert comes in, typically it will come in through as an alert, and there might be a couple notifications beforehand, but that's all PagerDuty. Once the engineer has received the alert or the notification, they acknowledge it. So that's done through PagerDuty, again, probably through Slack. They'll just hit that acknowledge button. And then if this is an incident, they can change the priority level, or it could happen automatically depending on what it is. And they can reassign it to someone else if they need to. And they can actually kick off further communication to downstream services or departments if need be. So let's say like I'm handling like a platform service, and a bunch of other services depend on my platform service. So what we can do is hook things up so it's wired up so when alerts come in from my platform service, it can let other teams know downstream that, hey, there's actually an incident on this service. You should know about it as well. And then once the incident no longer impacts the environment, it can be resolved. And it sounds simple, but that resolution can actually be sent out to those people as well. So it can be during using Slack, for example, it can let them know, hey, it's over now, kind of thing. And that can be a signal to say, hey, is there a reason, or is there something that we need to look at to make sure that it's still working after we said everything is resolved, just to verify that kind of stuff. And then during the post-mortem phase, PagerDuty's leveraged in order to figure out like, hey, when did people get the alert? When did they acknowledge the alert? When did we involve the other teams? That kind of thing. So it can be an easy way for you to sort of recreate the incident timeline when you're doing your post-mortem or your root cause analysis or whatever it may be for your team. All right. Sorry for that long spiel, but yeah, we use a lot.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, well, now let's turn things around. I can explain how PagerDuty uses Datadog. So Datadog. I mean, Datadog. We live in Datadog to the appropriate extent. Datadog is basically the operational data engine for PagerDuty. All of our metrics, all of our kind of production observations, both the traditional IT metrics from hosting integrations, but also a lot of specific metrics, what we've built. And by putting everything in Datadog, we can visually correlate on dashboards and alert on interactions between metrics. And that's both kind of your traditional stuff, like, are we going to run out of disk? Is the CPU load high? How are my things at AWS doing? But also the service metrics that we can build into our stuff and events. And I kind of want to drill down a little bit into those last things, because I think that's where a ton of the value in Datadog comes from. Really, metrics and events, our own metrics and events is the key to using Datadog effectively for us. If you're just using hosting integration metrics, which is kind of sort of your typical, deploy Nagios, find out how the instance is doing, you're missing a lot of rich data about what's happening with your services. And it turns out you don't actually care if the CPU load on an AWS instance is high. You care whether or not that's affecting your service, because you care whether or not your users are happy. To use PagerDuty as an example, we're microservice based. And so each team is responsible for the full ownership of their service, including its operations and production. What that means is that they need to figure out what the key metrics are for the inside of their service to be able to tell if it's healthy or not. And Datadog makes it really easy for us to build that instrumentation in so we can see what's going on inside. The way we do that is basically the key to all of this for us is a process called dogstatsd. StatsD is a de facto, it's a metric ingestion standard that Etsy came up with back in 2011, and it's kind of stuck around ever since. They got it right. By now, pretty much all languages have a StatsD library available. Most of PagerDuty is written in Elixir, and Elixir is not the most mainstream language in the world, and it has a StatsD integration. And on top of that, Datadog offers some of its own libraries for popular languages that add some extensions. So you take StatsD, you run it on your instances or on your VMs, or if you're in Kubernetes, you run it as a sidecar, and your applications can just publish StatsD metrics, hand them off to StatsD, and it doesn't have to worry about what happens to it after that. And then you use those metrics in Datadog. Events is wonderful. Events is a Datadog specific extension to StatsD. And it basically lets you record the timestamp of important things. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a bit. The other thing is that there is a REST API in Datadog. So if you have an environment, say you're running something serverless, you can submit metrics and events directly into Datadog REST API. The key the key monitors. So once you get all those metrics in there, monitors are the key. Ryan mentioned earlier that that PagerDuty helps him not stare at dashboards. What he really meant is that Datadog and PagerDuty together make it so that he doesn't have to stare at dashboards. We're beyond the NOC model. We've got all of these teams that are responsible for their own operational load, plus platform teams, which I'm on. We don't want engineers to have to look at dashboards in peacetime. They're busy building the next feature. They're busy paying down engineering technical debt. If there's no operational work to do, then I don't want them even thinking about it. And so the great part about the monitors in Datadog is that once you have all your data in there, you can start expressing relationships between it, applying functions to metrics, correlating, and then trust Datadog to tell you when something's wrong. So here's a pretty simple monitor, but it's got two metrics in it from our Nginx integration, which is built into Datadog, by the way. One of the metrics is reporting the absolute number of 500 errors, internal server errors. And one is expressing the total number of requests. And so just we can do a little bit basic math on this and say, tell me when the minimum of this expression, and the expression, of course, is figuring out the percentage of 500s over the total number of requests, when over the 5 minutes, the minimum of it is greater than 1. So that's going to alert. You can see that there's a message in there too. And the message lets us put a link to the runbook or the playbook right into the notification. So you get your notification and you can go straight to the runbook from there. When you get that notification, you get this rich context. There's kind of a lot to see on that slide there. And of course, if I were to scroll down on that fake phone, you'd see even more. But the great part is that notifications have a ton of context. When I get paged, I get woken up in the middle of the night. I'm kind of bad. I look at my phone, and I can see not just that I'm getting paged on this thing, but I can also see, the last 15 in this example, the last 15 minutes of memory usage on the service that's alerting, and I've got links there to go in and see the Datadog monitor. If I scroll down, I'd have the contents of that message that I showed you a second ago. That would have a link to the runbook, and everything that you need to respond is right there. If you're the kind of organization that has sort of like us, where engineers are on call, then that means that they don't have to remember where all this stuff is. If you're in the kind of organization where maybe you have a little bit more separation between dev and ops, that means the developers can put the runbook in so that when the the frontline support folks get the alert, it's right there for them without having to know all of that context. I hinted at events earlier. Once a monitor triggers, then we start using dashboards. Runbooks and notifications usually link to relevant dashboards. And the great part about the dashboards in Datadog is that it's really easy to combine relevant metrics from multiple sources. Ryan showed you an example of a dashboard a while back, and I'm working off our production Datadog account here. The thing about being an engineer and not a dev advocate person is that I don't have a library of test accounts to do. So this is real PagerDuty information here. So I couldn't really show you a full dashboard without kind of showing a little more than we might want to show. But you all know what a dashboard looks like. Datadogs are good. What's fantastic is overlaying events. Each of those faint red lines you can see there is an event. In this case, it's a deploy. I wasn't able to find an example of a deploy causing a big deflection of metrics, which I guess is good for me, and it's good for PagerDuty users, but it's not very good for the slide. But you get the idea that if your services metrics tank, you'd be able to go in and look at metrics and events side by side. You can see I've clicked on one of the events there, and that in turn has highlighted one of those faint red lines, a little kind of a purplish color. So you can actually see the specific get ref or pull request or brand or a tag that's been deployed, or the start of a change window, and that's really powerful. The other thing I wanted to mention is just talk a little bit more about Terraform. I want to call it out too because it's been really powerful for us. Over time, your PagerDuty and Datadog configurations are going to get complicated. Whether it's, dashboards always need little refinements like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have this? Or monitors that turn out to have a few false positives. And so let's tune it a little bit more, especially if you have microservices and each service owning team is off doing what they want to do and without a lot of central coordination. You might also have change management controls, like for us at SOC 2. If we're going to make a change in production, we have a compliance control that says that change needs to be reviewed. And we don't want that to be heavyweight. We don't want a cab. I'm sure those of you that work with a cab, you know what it's like working with a cab. Those of you that are on a cab, I'm sorry. But the great part about this is that you can take infrastructure as code and you can make it monitoring as code as well. You get all the advantages of version control, of continuous deployment, being able to see the history of things, have someone else review things on the way out. And the reason we chose to use Terraform is that it supports so many APIs, and in particular, it supports both Datadogs and PagerDuties. And what that means is that we can express dashboards and monitors and PagerDuty services and connect Datadog and PagerDuty in the same repo as the code. Which means everything's all together. And then when you add a new feature to the code, you add new metrics to the feature, you add a new monitor for the metric, you add that monitor there, the metric to the dashboard, you have that entire change in a single pull request so that it can be reviewed and people later on can get the full context. All right. So when the rubber meets the road.
In practice. So how do we actually use it? So just to do a quick time check here. So I realize there are a couple questions coming through. We do see them. We do want to have a little bit more of a discussion and less so like a slideshow. So for this part, there's going to be a lot less notes, but a lot more talking. And what we're going to do is talk about how all of this plays out in practice. We're going to gloss over a few things here, just in the interest of time. So things like microservices, infrastructure as code, automated deployments. There are some links at the end that will cover this in great detail. I don't want to, assume that they're all there in the first place, but we are assuming that some of this is in practice at our organizations, and this is how we use the two tools integrated together based on those prerequisites, let's call them. And we're going to talk a little bit about like a shortened incident timeline. So the actions taken during the prior to deployment phase, during an incident, and after the incident has been resolved. So those seem to be the key phases for us to talk about how the two products integrate. So the first one is kind of prior to deployment. So we talked a little bit about Terraform, so creating services using templates in Terraform to define both PagerDuty and Datadog integrations, adding to both as needed, but also getting a head start on the support side ahead of time, as the same engineers will be on call. So again, this is something that we assume, but as Rich alluded to, like if you've got an ops and dev team, like if they're throwing things over the fence, this can still work. It just means that there's a little bit more thought applied to that process of changing gears, whereas when it's the same team, it's a little bit easier, right? So some good questions and points that arise are, and I'll sort of kick this off, but again, it's conversational. We'll try to hit as much of this as possible. The first question is like, how do we make sure we get all the building blocks in place in order to make sure we can respond to incidents and alerts as they come up? So for us, like being able to template things is really important. Prior to deployment, we'll do things like actually start testing our services and figuring out what the business metrics are as we go through the development process. And we'll start modeling out what those should look like. If they affect other services, so be it. We'll start adding to it. But it starts really early on, I guess, is the key takeaway here is that something we're consciously thinking about. It may involve stakeholders, like it might involve business metrics as opposed to just service metrics as well, but it's something we'll have in mind as we're deploying things. Sorry, Rich, I didn't want to talk too much.
Yeah.
The first one's always the longest, right?
Yeah, that's totally it. And getting this stuff right from the beginning is the key. I mean, when we're talking about DevOps, like there's this, if we're talking about like the original idea of DevOps is developers and operations staff working together, which also means, one of the practices that both Datadog and PagerDuty does is that we have developers on call for their services, the service ownership pattern, where you don't have that handoff. You've got subject matter experts, but ownership stays with the team that's working on the service. And the key to that, they know it best. And so that means it's really easy for them to figure out what the metrics to put to put in place are. And it's really, like I mentioned in my section a minute ago, it's about monitoring the things that you care about that are going to impact your users directly. You know, look at app metrics, don't look at CPU and memory. I mean, I won't say don't monitor that stuff at all, but those are lagging indicators. And the leading indicator is like, okay, so what's the user experiencing? You know, with us both being microservices based, that ends up being an awful lot of metrics, and sometimes a lot of developers working on metrics. And so, in terms of how to build that stuff, one of the things that we've really found is that you really need to kind of focus on. Well, there's a model called LETS, right? It's like, where are you going to start? Then LETS is latency, errors, traffic, and saturation. One of the things that we do is, since we always want that, and since we're always writing this stuff in Elixir, we have a framework that basically drops those in for you in advance. So if you're building a new application, you get that for free as long as you're working within the framework that we have. I think there's kind of the same sort of thing happening on your end of things, right, Ryan?
Yeah, you got it. And again, like, we've got a bit of time here, but I just want to talk a little bit about like white box and black box testing, right? So basically, ways of testing your service almost from the outside. So being able to see what it looks like from the outside in, as well as white box testing, so from the inside. And the combination of the two really allows you to sort of get what Rich is talking about, right? Like, is the service actually running, as opposed to, hey, what's the CPU and memory footprint of it? So when you're looking at the microservices teams or organizations or overlapping teams, it's really critical to be able to do things like continuously deploy your services on a regular basis, but at the same time be cognizant of these metrics as they're coming through, and knowing what's important versus what's not. So I'm kind of wrapping a bunch of stuff here together, but basically, like, that synthetic or user monitoring is important, and the CPU and memory stuff might be just as important, but maybe so more on the automation side, like what you can actually automate. So yeah, basically yes, and like
Yeah.
all of the above, yeah, for sure.
There's one thing I want to mention just before we move on into sort of the during the incident piece of things, and that's what I want to. If there's a takeaway aside from using PagerDuty and Datadog, which you should all do, if there's a takeaway in terms of monitoring, it's that everything you knew about averages is wrong.
Yeah.
Really, one of the keys to getting the right numbers when you're setting up your service is to think about percentiles. Averages hide so much detail. You know, if you've been around the industry a long time, you probably remember RRD tool, which was averages of averages, and it would give you some information, but it would throw so much away. If you look at percentiles, if you look at the 95th and the 99th percentile on some of your indicators, such as latency or error, or errors and stuff like that, then you're really going to find out what is the user experience for the users that are getting the brunt of things. And if the average is fine, you can still have unhappy users. And once you start looking at those percentiles, the 90th, 95th, 99th percentile, then you can really get an understanding of what your user's experiencing. And that's how you set up alerts that alert you when the user experience is starting to suffer. Why don't we talk about what's going on? Once you got everything in place, things will still go wrong.
If you've been in the industry long enough, you probably have this feeling like red is bad, or like every failure is like a 5-alarm fire kind of thing. And I think, so Rich and I have been in the industry for a long time, and after a while you get used to sort of just failure is going to happen, basically. So if you know failure is going to happen, how do you prepare yourself for it? So some of that might be on the infrastructure side, some of it might be on the monitoring side, and a lot of it's definitely going to be on the alerting side. Like, how do you prepare for these alerts as you come through? So basically making sure beforehand that you've got the right people involved. So for us, and for me personally, like, reading the PagerDuty incident response guideline docs have been key. They've been updated a few times since they came out, but like, honestly, they're a really, really good place to start if you haven't seen them. But basically, like, if you know failure is happening, what sort of tools do you need to have in place? So we're talking about our own tools, of course, but like, what do you need to have in place that will allow you to do that monitoring with a tight integration into alerting? They'll like allow you to do things like attach runbooks to alerts, as Rich mentioned. Like, that sounds, again, simple, but it's really key when it's 3 a.m. and something's gone down. Like, knowing what to do is really key. And then the same thing, I think, Rich, you've got something called response plays in PagerDuty as well.
Yeah, response plays are really powerful. Basically, the idea is that once you've got an incident, and that's kind of like one thing has gone wrong to one service, but now you need to make a bigger deal of it. What a response play is, it's basically a macro. With a response play, you can say, okay, so I'm going to play the major incident response. What that's going to do is that's going to fire off, alerts to whoever's on call as our incident commander, and whoever's on call as the backup incident commander, because we always like to have two on a call. It's going to send stakeholder notifications to our executive leadership team and to the owners of those related services and so forth. And the great part is you can do that all with one click instead of having to go around and go, oh, what service do I need to find in PagerDuty in order to send a stakeholder update? Or how do I page incident commanders in? Is it this service or is it that service? You can just click the response play and it automates all of that response for you. So go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I was just about to say, like, we keep saying, like, don't use dashboards, but I think this is where you start to use your dashboards, right? Like, this is where you're going to want to refer to the dashboard that you set up ahead of time, be it in test, dev, staging, prod, what have you. And this is actually where you might want to start either cloning and modifying your dashboards or setting up new dashboards, or possibly like ways of setting up a dashboard for the incident is another thing that we do, like, or even a Slack channel for an incident. Like, there's ways of basically essentially getting like a muster point, getting everyone together on one area. So for us, that's really key, like a way to communicate what's currently happening on the incident. Is that something that you do as well, Rich?
Yeah, one thing that we found really useful in terms of dashboards, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, that don't think about dashboards as a per service thing. Is that we have, like, there are a few flows. I mean, a perfect example in PagerDuty that I think everyone can probably relate to is that events come in one end and notifications go out the other end. And that whole system inside there is what we call our notification pipeline. It's comprised of a surprising number of services. Some of them are kind of critical path, some of them are sort of auxiliary. And we have an SLA on that. We offer 5-minute SLA on notifications from in to out. And so the way that we keep track of that, aside from monitoring for that SLA end to end, is we've got a dashboard, which is like the first place people go, which we call the snake bump. And if you picture a snake that's eaten an egg or something, it goes along and there's a little bump on it, and then a little later the bump's kind of moved along. And so that's sort of what this dashboard is, our snake bump dashboard. We've got all of these services, which is event ingestion and processing, deduplicating and stuff like that, scheduling the alerts, actually powering the notifications. And if we get, say, a high volume of events come in. Sometimes if you're in AWS, you know that US East 1 can be a bit of a tire fire sometimes. Even though we're not in US East 1, we know when it's being a tire fire because we see this little bump come in and we watch it go through. But when things get backed up, we can see exactly where in that pipeline they're getting backed up. So really designing your dashboards for wartime, designing your dashboards for what am I going to need to see to understand the entire system in the middle of an incident is really key.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we kind of mentioned this before, but getting the right people involved, like when you're talking about like the business stakeholders and stuff like that, having those response plays that automatically loop them in is key, or having that Slack channel or team channel set up so that they know when it comes into that channel, they get the alert, they realize what's happening is really, really important. So having the right team involved is obviously brass tacks, but also getting the dependent services involved, getting your incident commander involved. So knowing like when something goes from a notification to an alert, from an alert to an incident, and you need someone to handle communications for you while you're also working on the incident is really key. And I mentioned it, but the stakeholders, so the person from the business unit that's like involved in your incident or involved in your service or involved in the customer facing area is really key. And that way you don't necessarily need to worry too much about the communication because they're involved. At the same time, you can also work on the problem while someone else sort of filters that info up to them. And all of this can be handled with both tools, which is really, really important to me. Sorry, to us. But being able to drill down and understand what's really going on for those business unit members is super, super critical. So I think I covered like communication. I think that the main thing that we're trying to do during an incident is trying to get like the least effort to resolve, I think as Rich put it, solution out of the door. So getting the fix in place quickly, but also working on the full time, like the end-to-end fix at the same time.
Absolutely. I want to make sure we give some time for questions at the end. Why don't we talk a little bit about what happens after the incident? Yeah, post-incident response, it's its own field. It's a field that's very dear close to my heart. I'm very passionate about learning from incidents and stuff like that. There's a lot, I could go on at length, and I'm not going to, about incident response, but when it comes to PagerDuty and Datadog, the real thing that you get on that is that you can learn, you've got time after the incident to go back and look at all of the data. When you're in an incident, you're kind of in a tunnel looking towards the resolution, and there's a bunch of stuff. In hindsight, you have an opportunity to see so much more. And that's not to say, use the hindsight to say, hey, you did things wrong when you were looking at it. But it's like, well, now that the pressure's off, let's take a breath. Let's take all of this data that we've been collecting for a while, and let's find all those correlations that we didn't know about before. Really being able to put that all together. Look at your chat log is a good example. One of the features of PagerDuty's most modern feature is you can actually integrate it with Slack and pull in, if you have an instant response channel that has your conversation, you can just pull that all in and then choose the key moments that you want to include in the timeline. Look at screenshots and graphs. There's a great feature in Datadog that I feel like people don't talk about enough called notebooks, that lets you basically come up with a narrative and a bunch of time-locked graphs with like markdown text between them, and you can really set up like almost like a paper on like a really rich document in terms of what happened. Of course, that's coming from the PagerDuty side. What about you folks in Post?
Again, it's yes and. So of course we use notebooks because we're at Datadog. But I think the key thing is like even if you're using Google Docs or Word or I don't know, maybe it's Compliments or what have you. The key thing is as you go along, being able to put these things in so that you can work on the why, right? So the question is like why we're doing all this. So we mentioned before like incidents is sort of an opportunity for improvement. They're not to be seen as like great failures. Of course, things going down is never good, right? It's not a good thing, but the key is to sort of switch that mindset to think of this as an opportunity for you to fix, tech debt, what have you. And being able to collect all that stuff into one page. And Rich mentioned a paper, but honestly, like in some cases at Datadog, we'll actually get a lot of people together to sort of learn at the same time about how some engineers reacted to a failure and things that you can learn from it, especially when you've got like different levels of engineering. You'll find that you learn a lot about how they react during an incident and what they did. Like, oh, so you did this, like, why did you do this at this point in time? And that's what the notebooks can really handle. Again, you don't easily use our product for that, but of course, if you did, that'd be great. But even in a Google Doc, just talking about like when you did things, but also why you did things and like how you're trying to resolve the problem. And you might hear a lot about 5 whys or infinite hows, but sort of drilling down into the methodology of like how we reacted to an incident as opposed to what we necessarily did is really handy for the next incident. So, or the next time something happens. And it can actually be a really good teachable moment to allow people to learn from these incidents so that it's not just like a net, you didn't really win anything, things went down, it's not great, but actually making this learning opportunity can be a huge force multiplier for the business.
All right, we've got about 15 minutes left. Why don't we turn this over and see if we've got some questions come in?
Excellent. Yeah. All right, guys. I'm back. Okay, yeah, we have gotten some questions in. I do want to let the audience know, though, that there is plenty of time. If you do have a question, please go ahead and submit it. Let's go ahead and dive right into the ones we have. Is there a way to include playbooks or some other way to ensure if support can cover the alert before alerting?
Yeah, I can answer. I'm actually going to go. going back to a slide is going to be a little bit tricky, I think. Ryan, you've got the
yeah,
whole
let's see. How far back do you want to go?
Yeah, can you go back to my screen? That's the one. Yes.
Look at that. It's almost like I've used PagerDuty before.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You really can. I wish I had a demo account where I could pull up a big example of this. I'm on a call right now. I better not try to figure out how to do that. Yeah, there's a lot of room to put a bunch of rich context into those. And I see the timestamp on the question. I think this was asked before I showed some of this stuff. But really having it all right there is so important. We as a rule, at PagerDuty, a monitor isn't done unless it has a link to the playbook, a link to the associated monitors, a link to a search for the logs for whatever might be going on, all of that stuff. The other thing that you've got in things that come from in notifications that come from PagerDuty is linked to related incidents. So sometimes you can't have a runbook for everything. And so sometimes being able to click through and see related incidents and see that, oh, last time, Amir was looking at this and it wasn't in the runbook, but he solved it this way, because you can put some resolution notes on an incident, can really help you to resolve things up.
Excellent, excellent. Rich, this one is for you. How do you discard false alarms to actually escalate issues?
That's a great question. That's the whole problem, right? Is getting
Right.
the signal and noise. And I divide the answer up into two halves. There's the half that us humans can do, and then there's the half that the computers can do. The computers part is actually probably easier to talk about. You know, in PagerDuty, there's some kind of advanced features that we really didn't have a chance to get into that are kind of under the umbrella of event intelligence. And what that is that gives you a lot of functionality to take a lot of observations that are coming in from your systems and group them either through some rules that you set up, or by time, or even by applying machine learning, to be able to kind of drill through the noise, see if this is a false positive, and so on. Those are like, it's really just a click and you get it kind of thing. It's pretty cool. The other side of that is the human part. And I think the biggest part of the human part is establishing a culture where false alarms aren't acceptable. One of the policies we have on my team is that if someone's on call and they get false alerts, then dealing with that, opening a ticket for that takes priority over the regular work. It is so easy to burn out a team member, and so on. Just generally have a crappy on-call rotation if you don't keep on top of false positives. And one of the things that's great about, you know, to tie this back into Datadog, is the refinements that you can make on the alerts. Like if you go back to kind of like sort of these, either the small things like the Nagioses and Zavixes, or the big things like, you know, I haven't worked in enterprise in a long time, but like the big things you buy from HP, the challenge you kind of have with that stuff is that relating all of these things together makes it really hard. But once you're able to put metrics in your services and really alert on users are having a bad experience right now, and not just, hey, there's some numbers coming from the kernel that don't seem very good, it's a really good way to kind of get away from the false alerts. So just kind of sum that up, like a combination of improving the data that comes into PagerDuty as good as possible, and Datadog is really good at cutting through all that. And then inside PagerDuty, applying the event intelligence, alert grouping, and all that stuff to make sure that the things that get through are the things that you care about and the things that your users care about.
All right, great. Next question, can you query PagerDuty Slack integration in a Slack channel to see who is currently on call?
You can. So there's a really easy answer to that question. I love questions that have easy answers, and the easy answer is yes. You can. The latest version of the PagerDuty Slack integration has literally that in it, where you can do /PD on call, and it will tell you who's on call. Another cool thing we have that we actually built for internal use before the PagerDuty Slack integration has that is a serverless function called Who's on Call, which you can basically integrate with Slack, and it will update the topic of a channel to show who's on call for the service related to that channel. That's available on our GitHub. I'm not sure the best way to actually get the link to it right now, but Who is on Call bot is what it's called, and it's in the PagerDuty GitHub organization. So between the / command, so you can get it on demand, and the Who is on Call bot to be able to see, kind of just join the channel and see who happens to be on call at the time. It's really easy to get that information in Slack.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, we're about 8 minutes to the top of the hour. Oh, make that 7 minutes to the top of the hour. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. So here's the next one. What does the auto managed field indicate in the Datadog triggered monitor view?
Yeah, so I'm not sure which view this is. I went looking for it just to make sure. Sorry, Rich, did you have an answer for this? Because I actually had to.
If you want to go back to slide 27 there for me.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out
the monitor one you were just on. It's like, unfortunately, the answer to this is kind of boring. So
Datadog,
the tags.
Yeah, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, it's a tag. Datadog lets you tag monitors the same way you might tag AWS services or something like that. And in this particular case, I've blanked out a bunch of other tags here that are sort of internal stuff, but this is just an arbitrary tag, and we tag monitors that were set up with Terraform so that people know not to modify them by hand, because if they modify them by hand, then they're going to get clobbered the next time someone applies Terraform. The other things we do with tags is we tag the monitor with the repository that it came from, so you can go back and find where the code is. We tag it with the team that owns it, so that if something's going off, we can actually figure out, oh, it's that belongs to that team, and so forth. It's just a way to basically associate arbitrary metadata with your monitors.
All right,
there's
great.
one last one here. I'm not sure if we have time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we do. Using PagerDuty integration with Microsoft Teams, can responders add Teams to their notification methods in addition to email, phone, text, app, and receive incident notification directly and not just into a shared channel?
Yeah, and Rich, if it's okay, I can talk to this one because I've
Yeah,
definitely done all of
I
this.
haven't used Teams, so if you have, then
Yeah,
yes.
that's kind of what I figured.
Awesome.
So in the previous org, I was actually in the enterprise space, and as you know, like Teams is pretty popular in the enterprise space. So the answer here is yes. So yes to all of this. So you can do it to yourself, you can do it to a team. I did want to just quickly note that generally what you want to do is not have it just go to one person when it comes to alerting. You want to make sure, like, hey, if you're not available, if it's an alert, you don't want to just message one person. But in this case, we're talking about notifications. So yeah, totally, you can. Especially if you're just setting something up for test, I would often deploy a service, and before I sent it into the share channel, I would send it to myself in Teams just so I know about it. So the answer to all of this is like, yes, you definitely can send it to yourself, as well as send it to the team, as well as phone, text, and app. All of the above are possible with Teams right out of the box, which is super, super handy. Like I said, the Teams integration with PagerDuty is actually quite good, especially comparing it to other Teams integrations that you may have seen. It's one of the best out there.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. We did just release a new Teams integration. Unfortunately, I haven't used it. This is the challenge with having an engineer on the call. We use Socket PagerDuty, so I haven't touched the Teams stuff. But we did just release a new Teams integration. It's available on the Azure Marketplace, so you can jump in there. You know, if you've got your PagerDuty account, you can set up that, set it up through the Marketplace and play around with it yourselves.
All right, nifty. All right, great. Well, we are about 4 minutes to the top of the hour. I can count. So we are going to have to close out the question and answer period. But I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. If we didn't get to your question, please note that the folks at Datadog are getting a copy of all the questions, and they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline. So please don't think that your question is going to go unanswered. At the top of the hour, I did note that we would be doing a drawing for 6 $25 Amazon gift cards. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Our winners today are Dan O. Congratulations, Dan. Our next winner is Gerard B. That's 2 R's and then another R, B. Congratulations, Gerard. Third winner today is Krista with a K, P. Congratulations, Krista. Fourth winner, you guys are so funny. Fourth winner is Michael M. It's pretty straightforward, Michael M. Congratulations, Michael. Fifth winner today is Zach with a CH, M. Congratulations, Zach. And our final winner today is Tom W. So guys, congratulations to all of you. We'll be following up with you via email to get your Amazon gift cards over to you. So please check your inbox. Love having a peanut gallery here. Also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again because we're having so much fun, please, you will have the opportunity to do so. We are going to be sending out an email after the event that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Ryan and Rich, thank you so much for a great presentation, lots of great questions. So I know folks were super interested in it. And, you know, it's always fascinating to learn how the technologies integrate with each other. So thanks so much for the information, lots of good stuff.
Thanks for having us. So I just want to put up a couple last slides before we leave. But basically, sign up for a trial.
Go ahead.
Honestly, like it's 14 days, it's free. Sign up. I've used the PagerDuty trial before to set things up very quickly. It's awesome. I've used our trial, of course, for personal use as well as business use. And then when we hand out the slides, the reason you might want them is because we do have a bunch of resources back here. So we've got links to books, links to repositories. So if you want to do like your Terraform stuff in PagerDuty, Datadog in Terraform, that kind of stuff, we've got links for both of these. Same thing for like documents. We talked about Etsy tools a little bit. So some of that, like the debriefing facility guide is actually really good. And then a last link just to some talks here. So definitely do look at the slides when they send them out. There's value in there, and sign up for a trial. It's honestly worth it. That's all I got.
All right. All right. Well, with 1 minute to spare, I am going to say signing off. This is Charlene O'Hanlon. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe. Bye.
Bye, folks.